I find it to be quite foolish that the Eastern countries are so open about their gold accumulation. And, but it's not true how much they're accumulating. You got analysts from the Bank of Montreal. You got even people, I think, in the IMF who came out and said the numbers that we see are nowhere near what is actually being accumulated. And China is the largest producer of gold in the world, too. They're not telling us how much they're producing. We have no idea how much they're really, truly accumulating. But I think it's very foolish. I think it's hubris. I think it's recency bias, normalcy bias. I think the West is if they really aren't accumulating any, they're asleep at the switch.
In this video, market trader Andy Schectman discusses China's strategic accumulation of gold and its implications for global gold and silver prices. Despite being the largest gold producer, China remains secretive about its actual reserves. This contrasts sharply with the West's approach, potentially leading to significant economic shifts. Andy highlights the importance of gold's stability and lack of counterparty risk, suggesting Western countries may be underestimating its value. Learn how this shift might affect global financial stability and why the West should reconsider its stance on gold accumulation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates.
Who knows what our real gold reserves are? Who knows where the 12 billion in gold reserves that the Ukraine supposedly sold to fund the war went? Who knows where Saddam Hussein's gold went or Gaddafi's gold went? I don't know. It's actually, I find it to be quite foolish that the Eastern countries are so open about their gold accumulation. And, but it's not true how much they're accumulating. You got analysts from the Bank of Montreal. You got even people, I think, in the IMF who came out and said the numbers that we see are nowhere near what is actually being accumulated. And China is the largest producer of gold in the world, too. They're not telling us how much they're producing. We have no idea how much they're really, truly accumulating. But I think it's very foolish. I think it's hubris. I think it's recency bias, normalcy bias. I think the West is if they really aren't accumulating any, they're asleep at the switch. This is a system where, look, if you look at a historical footprint, accepting treasury debt, the debt of another country, has a very small footprint in terms of being historically significant. And I think we're moving away from that. And when you weaponize the treasury and make it so that if we don't align ideologically, we're going to take it from you, only is incentivizing and accelerating the detreasurization, the de-dollarization, and the accumulation of gold, which has no counterparty risk. And this is the whole thing here. It's an asset not only that has outperformed the bond market going back to 2000 handily, but it's an asset that carries, as Doug Casey has made famous his statement, an asset that simultaneously carries no counterparty liability. And it's true. And I think that's really what the world is realizing, that if, as Rick Rule says, you're not a contrarian, you're destined to be a victim. And if you're fully invested in dollars, you're destined to go broke. Well, that's the same thing that I think the central banks see and are acting upon. And the truth of it is that our media doesn't do a poor job of telling us this. They do no job of telling us this. And there are a lot of very sophisticated people in finance that are very well read. They just read the wrong stuff. They should be listening to you, and maybe they would have a better understanding of what is actually happening. But the flow of gold and silver, this decades-long standing trend of the price of gold and silver being determined by the Western institutional investors, it's breaking down. And again, I think the underestimating of the significance of this is a big, big mistake. And I think it will one that will wake up one morning. The West will wake up and say, what did we just allow happen? The prime example of it is the arbitrage on silver. You have a $4 increase on the Shanghai Metals Exchange over COMEX, real damn near $4 an ounce higher. So the arbitrage is real. Any metal that can be purchased in the West and delivered to the East will happen at that level. And I think it should be the opposite of that. We should be hanging on and accumulating whatever we can. Instead, we're sending it all that way. Gold and silver are assets that have no counterparty liability. And the West has proven how dangerous it can be in holding traditional assets. They can be inflated upon, they can be defaulted upon, and they can be confiscated if we don't align ideologically. That's like sticking a knife into the heart of this country's trust globally. And you take a glass and throw it against the wall and break it into a million pieces. Putting that back together is not easy, if not impossible. And I think we've come damn near close to destroying our trust. And now if you talk about lowering rates and giving up on austerity, giving up on normalizing, I mean, we never will. We got 200 trillion literally in debt, both funded and unfunded. How do you ever normalize? I guess you probably won't, and we will do what all governments have done, and that's to choose inflation over austerity. But it's not going to end well. And this is the whole reason why the central banks, who not only are the wealthiest, but they're the most well-informed traders in the world, and they continue to buy gold because they see the handwriting on the wall, while the people in the West believe this could never happen to us. And that's the fatal flaw in all of this.
Market trader Andy Schectman highlights China's strategic accumulation of gold and its impact on global markets. Despite being the world's largest gold producer, China keeps its exact gold reserves secret, contrasting with the Western approach. Counterparty risk is risky compared to the stability of gold. As Eastern countries buy more gold and push de-dollarization, the West may be underestimating these shifts. He calls for Western investors to focus on gold accumulation to avoid potential financial instability.
A currency wars, indeed, yeah. And you race to the bottom. Well, that's not a recipe for success. That's not a currency you want to be hanging on to. But it becomes a bigger problem when you talk about the U.S. bond market. If everyone is racing to the bottom and cutting, what does that say for the ever increasing debt burden that we have? Look, the national debt right now is $34.7 trillion here in the U.S. And if I just read a statistic that says if you laid that money, that many dollar bills end to end, it would wrap around the earth 134,599 times. That's enough to travel the sun and back 17 times. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. How do we continue to finance our debt by cutting rates when the world realizes that we have chosen inflation over austerity? And that's really the problem. When you see all of these countries shedding, if you look at a graph of China and their treasury holdings versus their gold accumulation, it's like this. They're dumping treasuries as fast as they can to not cut off their nose to spite your face. And I would argue this is part of the reason that rates are continuing to stay elevated, is that a lot of ththese countries are selling debt. And you look at the countries that we are supposed to believe are now leading the accumulation of our treasuries. You got Ireland, you got the UK, you got the Cayman Islands. I mean, I got a bridge to sell you if you believe that's true. Guys like Jim Willey have the courage to come out and say that he believes and has heard from his sources that the Federal Reserve is paying money under the table of these countries to continue to support. And of course, with the carry trade unwinding, there's a lot of things going on right now that I think if you cut, you signal. You really signal that you're waving the white flag, and I think that only accelerates the cohesion and the rapid growth of the organizations like the BRICS and the continued de-dollarization and de-treasurization, which I really do believe is being replaced right now with gold. And if you look at gold since 2000 as an example, it's massively outperformed the bond market. But what it has is that it has no counterparty risk. And when we go around the world imposing sanctions and now have the nerve to actually steal the Russian assets, to use it to fund the Ukraine war, and you got the European Union talking about seizing, which we already have, they have the 290 billion or 80 billion in Russian reserves. Now, they haven't talked about actually taking that money as much as they have taking the interest generated from it and using it to fund the Ukraine war. Collectively, the West has lost its mind. And I think when you talk about cutting rates, it will only add fuel to the cohesion and to the rallying cry to move away from the West. I think it would be as foolish as can be. But when you look at all of the stupid things that have been done by the West collectively in terms of geopolitically, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. In fact, the title of my first talk at Rick's conference is this all too foolish to not be planned? You look around, you say, my God, what are they doing? So the people leading the people pulling the strings. So I guess we'll have to see how it all plays out. But yeah, I just can't see them. I can't see cutting being a constructive course of action, and think it only accelerates the demise of the system, and the de-dollarization and the de-treasurization will only increase exponentially if we continue to go down that road.